Hi from a sunny winter day in Pretoria. Welcome back to our vlog. So I need to chat to you about Stitch in the Ditch. And I'm pretty sure if you're a quilter that does a lot of custom quilting or a little custom quilting, you have a love-hate relationship with ditch work. How many of us do? Lots. But you will know from experience that ditch work is so important. And that doesn't mean you have to do each and every patch on your beautiful quilt that you spend hours on piecing. But ditch work has got a very refining look to it. It frames your work, it makes it look finished off. I usually explain it like you're going to this very fancy wedding. You have the little hat that you had specially made and a brand new outfit and jewelry to match, but you forget to put your earrings on. And that finishing touch is what ditch work does to a quilt. So we're going to look into preparation. What do you need to do to achieve a good ditch stitch? What's the best tools to work with? Thread that will go, and we'll talk through this on our frames setup, but also I'll show you on the Sweet 16. That'll be applicable for any sit-down machine. Let's look at thread. Your thread choice for your ditch work is super important. Obviously, if you're going to do work with a quilt that has a lot of colors in, you need to consider this very carefully because your thread will show up more on certain fabrics than it does on others. What always works well with ditch work and helping to hide that stitch, because the stitch is meant to be in the ditch, not next to the ditch or several feet left or right of the ditch, is that you want to use a thinner thread that will help you to hide that ditch and not make it as pronounced, the stitching itself. And that thinner thread also has a tendency to blend easier into different fabric colors. A great thread to work with that we really love locally is the Glide 60. It's a glide thread, which means it's a polyester that's shiny, but it is a 60 weight thread, so it is thinner than the normal one we work with. These come in really beautiful natural or neutral colors that blends well with any of your fabrics. Another option you can look at is a silk thread, which is closer to about 100 weight, so it's even thinner than the 60. That also will hide your ditch stitch and not make it as pronounced. Another good alternative, especially if you have a lot of different fabric colors in your quilt and you can't decide which thread color will work best, is to work with a monofilament. And they come in two colors basically, which is the clear and the smoky. Smoky works well on your darker colors. So if your overall quilt's color scheme is a little bit darker, then this is a good one to go with. And then the clear on your more lighter colors or brighter colors will show, well, it won't show. That's the purpose of it. You just need to be careful with these. They do tend to fall off the spool quite easily, so make sure that you work with your thread net around the thread, around the cone of the monofilament thread, and you need to slow down your stitching a little bit, and you need to bring your top tension down a little bit, just a little bit, to achieve an easy, smooth stitch with your monofilaments. Pressing of your seams are super important when it comes to having a good stitch in the ditch. And this is something that we pick up in all of our basic classes, basic patchwork classes, where the teacher will tell you make sure that you press the seams to the darker side or to one side. That it's more important that the seam, the entire seam, goes in one direction and that it doesn't flip-flop, because you'll see when I do the actual stitching now, having to deal with a flip-flop seam creates a problem in trying to hide your ditch work. So it's important, take some time and make sure that all your seam allowances are pressed to one side and that they don't flip and twist in between, as that will create problems for you, which is not necessary. So take an extra minute and make sure that you've done the prep on your quilt, and it will save you lots of headaches. Preparing our machine and getting ready with what we need to sew. We're on the Amara on the Studio 2 frame. Our ruler base is on, and you can see it if I press down on my quilt. I have my ruler base on because we're going to work with a ruler. And the ruler of choice for today is the Handi Quilter ditch ruler. And the reason being, it has these tabs on the ends that's 1/4 of an inch. And now remember, our ruler foot is a 1/2 inch diameter, which means it's a 1/4 of an inch distance from the needle to the side of the foot to the side of the ruler. So this is what we would like. The foot is going to run around on the edge of the ruler, but our stitch line will be in line with the tabs, which will be next to the ditch. So this is what we're going to use now. Then, of course, why we love the Amara is that this handlebar, if you are right-handed, in my instance, I'm right-handed, I want to move this handlebar out of the way so that I have a better space. Do you see that my arm is clashing with the handlebar at the moment in order for me to get my ruler into place? So we're just going to turn the handlebar out of the way like that. And now I have ample space to move my arm and move the ruler without hitting the frame or hitting the machine. So when we do our ditch work, find an inconspicuous place that you can start. If you like to start in a corner, then you do that. And just get your thread tied down and your needle in position. And now we're going to work with our ditch ruler, and we're going to place our ruler on the low side of the ditch. So if you look at this area, we have the cream fabric on the right. Our seam allowance have been pressed to the border side. So the high side of the ditch is on the left and the low side of the ditch is on the right. And we want to place the ruler on the low side, because if we do our stitch work, we can rather have the stitch line a needle width to the right, to the low side, than having to go up on top of the ditch, because then we're no longer on the ditch, then you're on a hill. And we need to get you down the hill and into the ditch. So you need to work on the low side. And we can simply butt the ruler, these two little nibs can just butt against the seam allowance. And have a look at your eye, just squint it and just see that this seam runs straight and parallel to your ruler. And take it slow and steady with ruler work and with ditch work. We do not want to unsew, do we? And if you look at your needle and you see that you might catch a stitch on top of the ditch or on the heel, go slow and move your ruler a little bit so that you can manipulate your machine and your needle to get on the ditch, in the ditch. Okay, and then we just reposition, and we're going to do the next bit. Reposition, swing our ruler, bring our ruler tabs right up to the ditch. So coming around the ditch, I now have a situation where the seam allowance is flipped, and you'll see there's a little wobble in the road. My seam allowance at the top has gone to the right, and at the bottom from here, it's gone to the left. So how do you deal with that? I'm going to stitch, and I'm going to stitch slowly until I can see where my ditch is flipping. And then I'm going to move my needle and my machine one stitch over, literally one stitch, so that I can get down into the low side of it, so that I don't have a long line of stitching that sits on top of the ditch on the heel. So here we go. Get everything aligned. And this is where I'm flipping, where my seam is flipping. So I'm going to go needle up, move my machine over to where I need the stitch to be, needle down, and now my stitch can run where it needs to run. Now, we don't always have straight seams. As you can see, we've got some curves that we sometimes need to ditch. And something that typically happens a lot as well is around applique or machine embroidery. That looks really nice and refined if you do a ditch stitch, or what we would call a ditch, where you stitch right next to the applique or very close to it to refine and define that shape. So we can't always deal with a straight ruler. Now, there's so many options available from us in terms of curves. So you would have a variety of choices to find a selection of curves that suit your needs. This is, for instance, our wave ruler. If I just place that ruler next to one of my seam lines, I would be able to see whether I'm getting away with one continuous stitch line. In other words, the use of one ruler in exactly the right place without having to shift the ruler in order to match with that curve. So there's the wave rulers. We have the arc rulers that has also a variety of shallow arcs and deeper arcs for you to play with, and just see which one fits. For instance, this one's a little bit too round. It might need a flatter curve, where that one is too flat. So it's a question of just playing in your ruler box. You need to have a lot of rulers. It's one of those things that you need as a quilter. So I've already looked, and this wave really works well, is as close as I'm going to get to that seam line as a curve. And we're going to just do that stitching, and you'll see that it works exactly the same way as you would with your straight edge ruler. So now we have the wave ruler in order to do the stitch in the ditch on a curved line. It's the ruler that I have on hand that fits this curve the best or the closest, but it might not be perfect. So I'm going to do my ditch work in little bits at a time. And this is a much better option to follow than trying to just freehand these ditches that's in curves. So here we go with a little bit of a curve one. And I do probably about 1 inch or 1.5 inches, depending on how closely the ruler matches the curve. Then I'll stop and I'll realign my ruler for the next 1 inch or 1.5 inches. So you don't necessarily have to be aligned and perfectly spaced for the entire section that you are stitching in the ditch. You want to focus just on that 1 inch, 1.5 inches worth of space, and take it slow. You'll hear that we're not going at top speed. Slow and steady right into the corner, little bits at a time. Our very handy Versa tool has got these 2 notches. Let me just put it over my darker fabric. So if you've ever wondered what these are, if you have this ruler, because this is such a nice basic ruler that we start you on a lot of the times, these notches help you to stabilize your machine so that you can do a ditch in a curve or stitch around your applique if you don't have that very specific ruler with that specific curve on hand. So this acts as a stabilizer, and you would put your ruler with that notch hooked around the foot and your hand on it. And basically what happens is that you're going to use the ruler to help push the machine in the direction that you want it. So your right hand acts as a stop-start and a little bit of guidance, but the main driving force sits behind your left hand, or the one that's on the ruler, so that you can guide it and get a ditch that's really nice without having to freehand it. And this, like I've said, this works really well around your applique as well, where you're sitting with a huge amount of different curves and angles, and you would just be able to drive or steer your machine in the directions that you need it. Now let's look at ditch work on a sit down. On our lovely Sweet 16 sit down quilting, same story applies with our ruler work. Again, the ditch ruler works well, but now remember we need to add some grip strips, the handy grips, to the back of our ruler so that it doesn't slip around, because then you'll end up with a ditch that's not in a ditch and a stitch that's not near the heel and one big mess. So make sure that you have a grip on your ruler. And now we're going to do the same thing. We're going to align the tabs with the seam allowance, and we're going to do our ditch stitch. And now you can see, I don't know if you can see, but there's a problem coming up. There's again a flipped seam. And then I also have another issue that I see that's going to happen, and we'll talk about that just now. Let's get there. So there's my ditch is now flipping. I'm going to go 1 stitch over, and I'm back on the low side. But I didn't press this very well. So you'll see there's a whole fold in my border fabric that's attached. And I'm going to do a bit of stitching there. If I just leave that fold, I'm going to continue stitching next to it. And then I realize, oh boy, I didn't press this properly. So let me fold open that border and get the ditch really into the ditch. You'll now see that the first section of ditch actually missed the ditch by 3 feet because the seam allowance wasn't pressed properly. So it's so important that you spend time on making sure that your seam allowances are pressed well and to the side to one side, not flip-flopping, not having folds in the seam allowance. So typically I would do a light press from the back of a block or the quilt top and then turn it to the front so that I can press from the front in order to avoid the folds on a seam allowance that happens like this, because it is going to throw your ditch stitch out. So we have a curve, and again, the same as with our frame, pick a curve that you have that's more or less the curve of the patchwork that you're going to work with, and work in little bits at a time. So instead of moving the machine, we now have our ruler done on our quilt, and I'll be moving our quilt, and we're still going to work just in about an inch, inch and a half sections, realign our ruler, and continue with our curves. Slow and steady, girls, slow and steady. Let's get my ruler realigned for the next little bit. And this is all I'm focusing on now. I'm not looking at what happens down here. This is not important right now. What's important is this little bit. And this little bit, my ruler is aligning. And I can stop and realign and carry on like that. And you can just see the beautiful definition that you get by doing your ditch stitch. So don't be afraid, slow and steady, take it easy, don't rush through it, but it needs to be done. Have fun!
All the machines basically come with a standalone bobbin winder, like we have here. So unlike your domestic machine where you wind the bobbins on the top, the long arms aren't like that. So you have your standalone bobbin winder, and often we have customers come to us or call us with problems. I said often online. The bobbin doesn't wind nicely, it's not correct, it jumps out of the tension disc. So just to give you a few pointers, the important things to remember. Your thread stand here, the thread mast, needs to be directly above this pole that your cone of thread stands on. Whether it's a small cone or a large one, needs to stand directly on there. The next critical part is your pigtail here. You have a tiny, tiny little Allen key screw on the side here. That must be secure. So this whole assembly here moves up and down if it's not tightened. It needs to be right at the bottom, and it needs to come out at a right angle towards you, not to this side, not to that side. When you're sitting directly in front of the bobbin winder, you want it to come out directly towards you. Then tighten that tiny little Allen key. You should be good to go. If you do have an issue, let's just thread this one with the thread. So I've got my thread cone. I go up through the thread stand, around the pigtail, and through the tension discs. I can adjust the tension here accordingly. Now, of course, you've got no numbers to know where you are in tension, but you get a feel for it. If you feel the tension on your machine, you know you can feel that there is tension on it or there's too much tension on it. Here, it's not so critical that you have this at the exact tension, because your bobbin case spring, the tension spring on that, adds a lot of tension. What is critical is that the thread goes through those tension discs. If it just loops around the edge but isn't between the discs, you're going to get no tension on your bobbin thread. So if you can look at this one, can you see how poorly wound this is? It's very, very loose. So you're not going to get a nice result with that. This bobbin is wound nicely, so the thread is much firmer. And it will wind on nicely. If you ever use invisible thread in your bobbin, don't wind it more than about half full. Because it's so fine, it gets sort of crossed over itself, and it can actually start to bow your bobbin out, so it doesn't fit so nicely in the bobbin case anymore. So just a bit of a tip for you if you use invisible thread. Don't overwind the bobbins. You can pretty much use any kind of thread in your bobbin. It can be cotton, it can be polyester, it can be a thicker thread, or it could be a 60 weight finer bobbin kind of thread. The advantage to those is you get more on the bobbin, so you quilt further with the bobbin lottery before your bobbin runs out. I use a lot of the glide thread, which is a shiny polyester thread. So a tip for you there, don't overfill the bobbins. If you do wind them, only fill them about 80%. Otherwise, the thread tends to spin off of the very full bobbin and it gets caught up in your check spring at the back of the bobbin case, and it causes you all kinds of problems. So just wind the bobbin a little bit less. With this bobbin winder, can you see there's a white line here going through? If I put the bobbin onto there, that white line indicates where the automatic stop point is going to be. So if I undo the screw here, I can move this plastic piece backwards and forwards, and I can then determine how full that bobbin is going to wind. Decide, okay, I want it here and on the side here, so I'm just kind of guessing. I'm going to tighten it up. Now when that bobbin winds, when it reaches the fullness where that white line is, it's going to stop, and I therefore know my bobbin isn't too fully wound for the type of thread that I have. So we're going to wind a bobbin now just to go through the process of how it's done. So as long as you have it threaded correctly up through your thread marks with that above your, directly above your comb, through the pigtail and through those tension discs, you should be pretty much good to go. The easy wind bobbins that we have the little slots in the side. So I just post my thread through from the inside to the outside, grab hold of that thread and put it onto the post here. It does need to be relatively tight here. If it's too loose, then the post inside is going to spin and not turn the bobbin. If you have that problem, you're just going to put a screwdriver gently between the split pin here and just ease it apart a little bit, that it will hold your bobbin a little bit tighter. Okay, ready to wind. I'm going to hold on to the end, the tail here of my thread, and I've turned the speed down relatively low. It's on 2 or 3. I'm just going to keep hold of here, press start, and as it starts to wind and it catches, then I'm going to tug on that thread and it breaks off the end. Once it's up and running, I can turn up my speed, I can put it on full blast, and it will stop winding when it reaches that line that we adjusted to. If I decide I want to stop it earlier, just press the stop button and you're all sorted. Another good tip for you, if you're finding that your thread does jump out of those tension discs, normally you'd go through your thread march, your pigtail, and then clockwise through your tension disc. So coming around, underneath, and to your bobbin. If that's not working and you find that it's jumping out here, take your thread anti-clockwise. So you're going to thread it around the other way, so it's going to go underneath and back over the top, then to your bobbin. Then there's no way that it can jump out of those tension discs. That should also help you out. Here's a nice little tip for you. If you're using rulers a lot of the time, they overuse, they build up a residue on the edges, which is dark black. It's oxidation or just lint and things that gets compacted onto the edge of the ruler. And as you're quilting, if you do it on white fabrics, you can actually leave a line of dirt behind where that ruler foot hops up and down against it and it knocks off the dirt. So top tip, rubbing alcohol, just your alcohol on a wipe, just give them a good clean every now and again. Can you see what kind of dirt comes off? I'd rather have that on my cleaning cloth than on my quilt. So every now and again, just go through all your rulers, give them all a nice wipe over, and they'll be brand new, ready to go. During the course of our videos that we're bringing you from my studio, there's always a little bit of sound effects going on, whether it's the Handi doors or the dogs barking. So we thought we'd try and introduce you to the main culprit. This is Molly. Nice. And she loves to bark at pretty much anything that moves. So she knows a little bit about quilting, but she knows more about barking at the gate and at the dogs and the birds and the gardener. So now you know who it is that's contributing to our videos. It's my favorite little sheepdog. So I'm very happy to have Talene back in the country. She's been out touring in America. We're fortunate that she is a Handi Quilter International Ambassador, and you were doing a big teaching event there in Salt Lake City. Just tell everybody about it a bit.
Yes, I was very, very fortunate and feel very honored to have been asked to teach at the Handi Quilter Annual Academy that's held in Salt Lake City. And that was an incredible 5 days with 40 plus teachers and 200 plus students. And we just did free motion quilting all day long for 3 full days. And it was just incredible. Met so many lovely people, so many of our Facebook community friends that we get to meet each other. And it was just the best company to spend time with and teach. Everything is so professional and so organized. It was one heck of a trip.
So it's basically a boot camp on steroids.
It is on super steroids.
And you'd recommend that our customers here consider it?
Oh, absolutely. If you want a trip of a lifetime, that is one that you can attend.
And I think the dates are out for next year already.
Dates are out for next year. They are already out, and you will find them on the handiquilter.com website under community, I'm pretty sure.
Excellent.
Yes.
Cool. Nice. Good to have you home.
Thank you. Love being back.
Good. We've been telling you for the last few months about the classes that Handi Quilter is offering at Festival this year. Talene is teaching, Jane Renton is teaching, and the plan was that Angela Walters was coming from America, that she would also be teaching. You may have heard, for very unforeseen circumstances, family issues, Angela is unfortunately not able to come, which is a blow, but we wish her luck and send her lots of love, that she gets through this time with her family and does what needs to be done there at home. We are all family people, and we know if you're given the choice between a quilt event and a family necessity, there's no question which way you're going to choose. So Angela, we wish you all the best. Please come and visit us another time. And for those that have booked classes with Angela, all is not lost. We have managed in the last week, with the help of Handi Quilter in America, to secure the visits. I don't know how else to put it. The awesome visit of Helen Godden, coming from all the way from Canberra in Australia. She is also a Handi Quilter ambassador, brilliant teacher, quite different but a lot of fun, and you will be offered classes with her in replacement for the ones that you might have had with Angela. The logistics are still being worked out. Anyone who had booked has been notified. If you would now like to join a Helen Godden class that previously wasn't available, the details of those will be released in the next few days. It will be on the festival website, and we will also release it on our Facebook page and on the HQSA.com website. So keep an eye out, and we hope to see you there having lots of Aussie fun.